Since the beginning of this year, oil prices are down anywhere between 40 and 52%, depending on which measures you're taking. And for Nigeria, oil is important, not just for public finances, but also for access to foreign exchange. But I'm sure you know, we trade with the Chinese. And so that's not the only, oil is not the only impact point for Nigeria. So any which way, what we imagine, what we expect to see, is that some of Nigeria's underlying issues become more urgent for resolution on the back of the current global environment. Having said that, what then do I think as far as commodities? As I said, let us understand a couple of things. If you look at the global commodity markets, last set of figures I saw, approximately $20 trillion of trading annually. Let me repeat that, $20 trillion of trading annually as far as commodities are concerned. In Nigeria, whether we know it or not, as I said earlier, commodities are approximately 30% of this economy. Agriculture, as I had said, 24%. Crop production is 22% of that 24. Mining, oil is 9%. And you're looking at non-oil mining, probably roughly about 0.5% of that, thereabout. And so it's a very large component as far as we're concerned. But typically, as I had said earlier, we have tended to look at commodities only from the dimension of agriculture, from the prism of agriculture, a very, very narrowing view. How then does this conference become relevant? My hope, of course, first and foremost, is that this is not just another talking shop. Where comments are shared and not a great deal gets done thereafter. But let's take a look at a couple of things. First and foremost, having said this is how large commodities are, where are we? What is the global positioning of Nigeria as far as commodities are concerned? Because the theme or the topic that I have been invited to speak to is Nigeria's key commodities, their global positioning, and their potential. Let me repeat that. Nigeria's key commodities, their current global positioning, and their potential. And in my view, their potential is enormous. But it's a matter of whether or not we really understand what needs to be done in order to tap into the enormity of what we've got. And so what are the key commodities? As far as Nigeria is concerned, yes, the usual oil and gas. Then you've got, in the mineral space, you've got coal, gold, you've got a whole raft of non-oil minerals. In the agri space, which is much better known, is where you talk and people say, oh, in the 1960s, Nigeria did cocoa, we did rubber, we did cotton, we did palm, we did granules. Today, much of these we still do, but very poorly. Let me repeat that. Much of these we still do, but very, very poorly. And so, the first thing that, in my view, we've got to understand is that Nigeria is exceptionally well placed in the commodity space if only she understood what needed to be done. So let's take oil and gas. 37 going to 40 billion barrels of crude oil. 6th, 7th largest producer. Africa's largest producer. But guess what? Processing precious little of this oil into anything meaningful. Oh, yes, I know. I haven't forgotten. The Dangote refinery comes on stream possibly next year, or hopefully next year. But since 1970s, oil was first discovered in 1959, 56, if my recollection is correct. What have we done? Essentially, mine and export crude. And guess what? That is what applies to all of Nigeria's commodities. We produce, we don't process, and we export. That not only is it suboptimal in terms of revenues, but it is also very much suboptimal in terms of the structure of the Nigerian economy. Anybody who, Economics 101, as I always remind myself, says that as a country evolves, it starts on the basis of its natural endowments, which is where commodities are, agriculture and mining. Thereafter, it progresses into processing, which is where it then begins to create things that didn't exist out of what its endowments are. And then it builds a robust service sector when it gets to maturity, or it has a dominant service sector at maturity. Guess what has happened to the Nigerian economy? Currently, as I said, commodities are about 30%, services are about 52% of the Nigerian economic space. Guess what is missing? Industry, processing. Currently, manufacturing is somewhere around about 10% of the Nigerian space. And therein lies the first level of Nigeria's missed opportunity. Missed in the sense that if only we effectively enabled our commodities to become inputs into productive processes, transformating processes in Nigeria as they do in other countries to which we export them, then imagine the job creation numbers that would have been. Indeed, basic economics also says that every country, labor drifts from agriculture into manufacturing. Why? Jobs are better paid, productivity is higher. But guess what the data for Nigeria shows? The Bureau of Statistics showed that in 2010, agriculture was about 30% of the labor force of Nigeria. By 2017, which is the latest figures that we have, or published anyway, agriculture had become 48%. And yet, the share of agriculture is going down. What does that speak to? It speaks to a diminution in productivity. It speaks to a non-advancement of the nature of our agriculture. For as long as I've been studying economics, and as I remind myself from time to time, I graduated PhD 30 years ago. Nigeria's non-oil mining has been pretty much irrelevant. And yet, both of these could have been the basis for building a solid industrial base. Let me repeat. If, as is the case, we expect that by 2050, the population of Nigeria will be the third largest in the world at 400 million people, then the challenge of creating an economy that provides jobs and keeps this economy cohesive and coherent does not begin in 2050. It begins now. That takes me back to the point that we cannot therefore continue on the basis of an agricultural sector where productivity is diminishing, a non-oil mining sector that remains very small, and an oil sector that is not fulfilling or contributing significantly to Nigeria's industrial advancements.